They called him the Ghost, not out of respect, but out of dismissal. Elias Vance was a fixture at Prestige Medical Center, as much a part of the sterile, white-walled environment as the incessant beeping of the monitors and the faint, cloying smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. For 2 years, he had haunted the halls of the emergency department, a man rendered invisible by a janitor's gray uniform and the quiet way he moved. He pushed a mop with a slow, rhythmic gait, his left leg dragging with a barely perceptible limp, a relic of a life no one here knew or cared about. He emptied trash cans overflowing with bloody gauze and discarded wrappers. He cleaned up spills, coffee, saline, and things far worse, with a practiced, detached efficiency that made him seem more machine than man. He was old, they thought, past his prime, a husk. The staff, a whirlwind of pristine white coats and brightly colored scrubs, moved around him, through him, as if he were a column of air. They didn't know that the slight rasp in his voice was the scar tissue of a battlefield tracheotomy. They didn't know the limp was from a fall, a 500-foot tumble in a crippled Black Hawk helicopter over the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. They didn't know that the tired, faded blue eyes that seemed to stare at nothing had, in fact, seen everything. They saw only the janitor, the old man, the ghost. And for Dr. Alistair Finch, head of emergency medicine, Elias was something even less. A target. Finch was a man sculpted from arrogance and tailored suits. His teeth were too white, his watch too expensive, his voice a booming, theatrical baritone that he used to command, to belittle, and to broadcast his own perceived brilliance. He saw the world as a stage for his greatness, and the hospital staff as his supporting cast and audience. Elias, with his silent dignity and shabby existence, was a personal affront to Finch's polished reality. The doctor took a cruel, specific pleasure in humiliating him. "Vance," Finch's voice echoed down the main corridor of the ER, sharp and mocking. "Spill on Bay 3. Looks like one of the residents has a case of the butterfingers. Can't hold a suture tray, can't hold his lunch. Clean it up." A ripple of sycophantic laughter followed from the junior doctors, trailing in Finch's wake. Elias said nothing. He simply nodded, his face a mask of placid indifference. He turned his cart, the squeak of a wobbly wheel the only sound of protest. He didn't look at Finch. He didn't have to. He could feel the doctor's smug gaze on his back, a physical weight of contempt. This was the ritual, the daily degradation. Finch would find a mess, a task, a reason to bark an order, always in the most public way possible. He needed witnesses to his power. For 730 days, Elias had endured it. He had taken the insults, the condescension, the casual cruelty. He needed the job. He needed the quiet anonymity. The world outside these walls was too loud, too fast, too full of ghosts of a different kind. Here, the work was simple, mindless. It was a penance of a sort, a way to be useful without being seen. But the weight of it, the slow, grinding erosion of his spirit, was becoming unbearable. The mask of indifference was growing heavier each day. They didn't know that the hands now gripping the handle of a mop had once performed a lateral canthotomy with a Leatherman tool by the light of a burning vehicle. They didn't know that the man they called the Ghost had another name, a name whispered with awe and reverence in the hushed, violent world of special operations. Wraith. They didn't expect that the quiet janitor they ignored was about to become the single most important person in the entire hospital. They certainly didn't expect that Dr. Finch's perfectly curated world was on a collision course with a truth that would shatter it to dust. Elias Vance wasn't just a janitor, he was a weapon, held in reserve, and the time for his deployment was drawing desperately, violently near. The pressure was building, the foundations were cracking, and soon everyone in Prestige Medical Center would learn what happens when you push a quiet man too far. The final straw wasn't a grand, dramatic explosion. It was a small, quiet thing, a mistake wrapped in arrogance that only Elias seemed to notice. A young woman had been brought in from a multi-car pileup, conscious but disoriented, with a nasty laceration on her forehead and complaining of abdominal pain. Dr. Finch, ever the showman, had swept into the trauma bay, his entourage of residents fanning out behind him. He made a grand spectacle of examining the patient, his voice a booming narration of his own diagnostic process. "Superficial head lack, likely concussion," he announced, barely glancing at the cut. "Abdominal tenderness is probably just seatbelt bruising. Classic presentation. Let's get her cleaned up, give her a few stitches, and we can move her to observation. We have actual emergencies waiting." He waved a dismissive hand, already turning his attention to a more interesting case in the next bay. From the hallway where he was wiping down a gurney, Elias saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible discoloration spreading on the woman's left flank. The Gray Turner's sign, a telltale indicator of retroperitoneal hemorrhage. It was faint, easily missed if you weren't looking for it, if you didn't know what it meant. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. That wasn't seatbelt bruising, that was internal bleeding. Severe, life-threatening bleeding. The woman's blood pressure, displayed on the monitor above her head, was already starting a slow, ominous drift downward. 110/70, then 105/68. He hesitated for only a second. He knew the rules. He knew his place. But he also knew the math of blood loss, the unforgiving calculus of trauma. He stepped forward, his mop handle clutched in his hand like a staff. "Sir," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Dr. Finch." Finch turned, his expression a mask of theatrical annoyance. "What is it, Vance? Can't you see I'm busy saving lives? Did you find a dust bunny that needs immediate attention?" "The patient, sir," Elias said, his gaze fixed on the monitor. "In Bay 2. Her flank is bruised," Finch snapped, cutting him off. "As I already diagnosed. Are you a doctor now, Vance? Did you get your medical degree from the back of a cereal box? Go push your broom. The adults are working." The residents snickered. A nurse looked away, embarrassed. Elias stood his ground for a moment longer. "Her pressure is dropping, sir. That's not a bruise." Finch's face darkened with fury. He strode over to Elias until they were inches apart, the doctor's expensive cologne warring with the smell of bleach from Elias's uniform. "Listen to me, you old man," Finch hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are a janitor. You clean filth. You are not to speak to me. You are not to look at my patients. You are not to offer your worthless, uneducated opinions in my ER. Do you understand me?" Elias looked from Finch's enraged face to the trauma bay, where the nurse was now frowning at the monitor, her hand reaching for the blood pressure cuff. The reading was now 98/60. The woman was going into shock. But Finch was a wall of ego that Elias could not breach. The system was designed to protect men like Finch, not patients like that woman. Defeated, Elias gave a single, sharp nod. The fight went out of him, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He was done. He turned without another word, pushed his squeaking cart to the janitor's closet, and left it there. He didn't clock out. He didn't collect his things from the small locker. He simply walked. He pushed through the double doors of the ER, the frantic energy of the department at his back. He walked past the waiting room, filled with the quiet misery of the sick and injured. He walked out the main entrance, the automatic doors sliding open to release him into the grey, drizzly afternoon. The parking lot was a vast expanse of wet asphalt. Rain slicked the hoods of cars and beaded on the windows. Elias walked to the far corner, to the employee section where his beat-up, 20-year-old pickup truck sat among the sleek sedans and SUVs of the medical staff. He leaned against the cold, rusted metal of the driver's side door, the drizzle plastering his thin grey hair to his scalp. He wasn't crying. The time for tears had passed long ago, in another life, another country. This was something worse. A hollow, aching emptiness. 2 years. 2 years of biting his tongue, of swallowing his pride, of watching and waiting and hoping for… what? Redemption? Peace? He had found neither. He had found only the bottom, and the realization that there was nothing left to hold on to. He had failed the uniform he wore now, just as he felt he had failed the one he wore before. The quiet man, the ghost, had finally given up. He closed his eyes, the sound of the rain and the distant city traffic, a mournful soundtrack to his surrender. The quiet despair of the parking lot was shattered not by a sound, but by a presence. A sudden, violent shift in the atmosphere. Elias's eyes snapped open, his senses, dulled by years of civilian quiet, screaming back to life. It started as a low hum, a vibration felt through the soles of his worn boots. Then came the sound, the high-pitched, desperate shriek of tires on wet pavement. A convoy of 3 identical blacked-out Chevrolet Suburbans tore into the hospital's ambulance loop, moving with a speed and precision that was utterly alien to the usual chaotic flow of traffic. They didn't slow for the speed bumps, they crushed them, their heavy-duty suspensions absorbing the impact with a grunt. They took the turn into the ambulance bay in a perfect, synchronized arc, their headlights cutting through the grey mist like searchlights. The lead vehicle screeched to a halt directly in front of the ER entrance, its doors flying open before it had even fully stopped. Men poured out. Not doctors, not paramedics. These men were different. They wore dark, sharply tailored suits, but they moved with the coiled, predatory grace of soldiers. Earpieces were clipped to their ears, and the slight bulge of a holster was visible under the left side of each jacket. They were Secret Service, or something very much like it. They formed an instant, impenetrable perimeter around the rear of the lead vehicle. One of them, a man with a jaw like a block of granite and cold, assessing eyes, barked into a wrist-mounted microphone. "Pathfinder is down. I repeat, Pathfinder is down. We are at Prestige Medical. Secure the entrance now." The hospital's own security guards, 2 paunchy men in ill-fitting uniforms, scurried out, looking bewildered and out of their depth. The lead agent pointed a commanding finger at them. "You! Lock this entrance down. No one in or out without my authorization. Move!" From inside the ER, faces began to appear, pressed against the glass of the automatic doors. Nurses, doctors, even Dr. Finch, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance at this disruption of his domain. The rear hatch of the Suburban flew open. Inside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. 2 more men, these ones in tactical pants and black polo shirts, with DHS Medic emblazoned on the chest, were working frantically on a figure strapped to a collapsible gurney. IV bags swung from a hook, and the floor was littered with the detritus of emergency medical care. Wrappers, spent syringes, blood-soaked field dressings. The patient was a man in his late 60s, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his silver hair matted with blood. A hastily applied cervical collar was around his neck, and an oxygen mask fogged with each shallow, ragged breath. His suit was shredded, and a makeshift tourniquet was cinched high on his right leg. The fabric below it soaked a dark, terrifying crimson. Elias could see the injury even from 50 yards away. A catastrophic crush injury to the lower extremities, likely from a vehicle impact. The tourniquet was a desperate measure, and the sheer volume of blood suggested it was already failing. The tactical medics and agents swarmed the gurney, pulling it from the vehicle. "Clear a path! Clear a path!" one of them yelled, his voice strained. They rushed toward the ER doors, a phalanx of grim-faced protectors around the critically injured man. The hospital doors slid open, and the controlled chaos of the convoy spilled into the sterile environment of the emergency room, bringing with it the smell of rain, gasoline, and blood. The air in the parking lot, once heavy with Elias's personal defeat, now crackled with a new, far more urgent kind of tension. Life and death were being measured in seconds, right in front of him. He remained frozen by his truck, a ghost watching a drama he was no longer a part of, the rain continuing its indifferent descent. Inside the ER, the arrival of the convoy sent a shockwave of panic and excitement through the staff. This wasn't a routine trauma. This was an event. The sheer professionalism of the federal agents, their cold-eyed intensity, elevated the stakes immediately. Dr. Finch, drawn by the commotion like a moth to a flame, saw his opportunity. A VIP patient meant attention, prestige, a chance to shine. He puffed out his chest, straightened his tie, and strode forward to meet the incoming storm, his face a mask of authoritative calm. "I am Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Emergency Medicine," he announced, his voice booming over the frantic shouts of the agents. "Bring him to Trauma 1. I'll take charge here." The lead agent, the one with the granite jaw, didn't even break stride. "General Thorne is the patient," he snapped, the name dropping like a bomb into the room. "He was involved in a multi-vehicle ambush. His security detail was hit. We have multiple GSWs on 2 agents, but the general's injuries are crush trauma. Right leg is compromised, massive hemorrhaging. He's received 4 units of whole blood in transit, but we couldn't stop the bleed." General Marcus Thorne. The name silenced the room. Even Finch's bravado faltered for a second. Thorne was a living legend, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a 4-star general who was as much a political heavyweight as he was a military commander. This wasn't just a VIP, this was a matter of national security. They swarmed into the largest trauma bay, the agents forming a tight, restrictive circle that hampered the hospital staff. Finch, recovering his swagger, began barking orders. "Get me a full trauma panel. X-ray. Bring the portable unit in here now. I want vascular surgery paged stat. Someone get that makeshift tourniquet off him so I can see what we're dealing with." One of the tactical medics, a young man with terror in his eyes, looked up from where he was trying to apply pressure to a fresh dressing on the general's thigh. "Sir, we can't. The primary femoral artery is likely severed. If you release that pressure—" "I am the doctor here," Finch roared, grabbing a pair of trauma shears. "I will not have my patient cared for with battlefield expedients. Get out of my way." He made a move to cut the tourniquet. "No!" the medic shouted, shielding the patient's leg with his own body. The monitors above the gurney began to scream. The general's blood pressure, which had been precariously holding at 80/40, plummeted. 60/30. The waveform flattened into a terrifying sine wave. The heart rate spiked into a chaotic, thready rhythm, then began to drop. 140, 110, 85. "He's crashing," a nurse yelled. "V-fib." Finch froze, the trauma shears in his hand. His face, just moments before a mask of supreme confidence, was now pale and slack. This was happening too fast. The controlled environment of his ER had become a vortex of death, and he was standing at the center, paralyzed. The textbook answers, the procedures he had memorized for his board exams, were useless here. This was messy. This was real. He was out of his depth, and the panicked, accusing eyes of the federal agents were all fixed on him. "Do something," one of the agents snarled, his hand instinctively going to the weapon on his hip. "Charge the paddles, 200 joules." Finch stammered, falling back on the most basic, reflexive response. But it was the wrong one. The patient wasn't in a primary cardiac event. He was dying from exsanguination. Shocking him would do nothing. "That won't work, sir. He's bled out. We need to clamp the artery," the young medic pleaded. "I need a surgeon," Finch yelled, his voice cracking, his eyes darting around the room as if a vascular surgeon might magically appear from a supply closet. "Where is my surgeon?" The countdown was no longer theoretical. It was visible on the monitor, each descending number a beat in a funeral drum. 70, 60, 50. The life of one of the most powerful men in the country was draining away onto the pristine white floor of Trauma Bay 1, and the man in charge had no idea what to do. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the suffocating stench of failure. Outside, in the rain-swept parking lot, Elias heard the rising panic, the shouts, the frantic beeping of the flatlining monitor. The sounds were faint but unmistakable. They were the sounds of a losing battle, a soundtrack he knew intimately. He pushed himself off his truck, every instinct screaming at him to walk away, to get in his vehicle and drive until the hospital was a speck in his rearview mirror. He had quit. This wasn't his problem anymore. But his feet wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, his gaze locked on the ER entrance. He saw the nurses scrambling, the terror on their faces. He saw the agents' postures shift from protective to aggressive. He saw the reflection of the crashing monitor in the glass. He saw death winning. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos. "Get him! Get Wraith!" The voice was ragged, desperate. It came from one of the agents standing guard at the door, a man in his late 30s with a jagged scar above his right eye. He had been looking wildly around the parking lot, his search growing more frantic until his eyes landed on the lone, still figure by the old pickup truck. His face registered disbelief, then a surge of impossible hope. "It's him! It's Wraith! Get him now!" he screamed, pointing directly at Elias. Another agent, the young tactical medic who had defied Finch, spun around. He saw Elias, and his jaw dropped. He had served a tour in Afghanistan as a green-as-grass ranger medic. He'd heard the stories. The legend of Wraith, the 18 Delta who could pull miracles out of a medkit in the middle of a firefight. A ghost who was supposedly killed in action years ago. But there he was. Older, grayer, wearing a janitor's uniform, but unmistakably the man from the grainy, revered photos in the training manuals. The medic didn't hesitate. He burst out of the ER doors, sprinting across the wet asphalt toward Elias, his face a mask of desperate pleading. "Sir, please, it's General Thorne. We're losing him." Elias stood like a statue. The name Wraith echoed in the rain, a ghost from a past he had tried to bury.
He shook his head slowly.
"No, I'm not. I don't work here anymore." "I don't care," the medic gasped, reaching him. "Sir, you're the only one who can do this. Finch is going to kill him. Please, he's got a shattered pelvis and the femoral is gone. We can't get control of the bleeding." The clinical details cut through Elias's resistance like a scalpel. Shattered pelvis. Uncontrolled femoral bleed. He could picture the injury perfectly, the jagged bone fragments shredding the surrounding tissue, the artery retracting into the wound cavity, impossible to clamp. Finch trying to remove the tourniquet. It was a death sentence. The medic grabbed Elias's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Please, Sergeant Major, he's dying." Sergeant Major. The rank, the title he hadn't heard in years, struck him like a physical blow. He looked past the frantic medic, at the doors of the ER. He saw the chaos inside, the helplessness. He saw the face of the young woman from earlier, the one with the grey Turner's sign, the one he had tried and failed to help. He had walked away once today. He couldn't do it again. Not with a man's life on the line. Not with a soldier calling for him. Something inside him shifted. The stooped shoulders of the janitor straightened. The tired, faded eyes sharpened, the blue hardening to the color of glacial ice. The rasp in his voice disappeared, replaced by a tone of pure, cold command. "Get me a Reboa kit," he said, the words sharp and precise. "If you don't have one, get me a 12 French sheath, a J-wire, and a Foley catheter. Now." The young medic stared at him, dumbfounded for a second by the sudden transformation. Reboa. Resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. A highly advanced, incredibly risky procedure to inflate a balloon in the aorta to stop all blood flow to the lower body. It wasn't something an ER medic was trained for.
It was a surgeon's last resort.
Or a combat medic's miracle. "We have a Reboa," the medic finally stammered. "It's in my jump bag." "Then what are you waiting for?" Elias snapped, already moving, his limp suddenly less pronounced, his stride purposeful and swift. "Move!" He didn't walk back into that ER. He stormed it. The janitor was gone. Wraith was back. Elias entered Trauma Bay 1 like a thunderclap. The cacophony of panicked shouting and screaming alarms seemed to momentarily falter as he swept past the stunned federal agents. He ignored them. He ignored the nurses. His entire focus narrowed to the man on the gurney and the failing monitor above his head. Dr. Finch, who was fumbling with the defibrillator paddles, looked up, his face contorted with rage and confusion. "What the hell is this? I gave an order. Get this janitor out of my ER," Finch bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Elias. "Security, remove this man." Elias didn't even glance at him. He was at the patient's side, his eyes scanning the monitors, his hands already at work. "Leave the tourniquet," he commanded, his voice ringing with an authority that shocked the room into silence. "It's the only thing keeping him from bleeding out on your floor." He looked at the young tactical medic who had followed him in, clutching the Reboa kit. "Prep it. I need access. Left femoral artery. Now." The medic, his hands now steady, ripped open the sterile packaging. The other agents, recognizing a new, competent authority, instinctively reformed their perimeter, this time facing inward, protecting the procedure and boxing Dr. Finch out. "I am in charge here," Finch shrieked, his voice becoming shrill. He pushed past one of the nurses, trying to get to the gurney. "This is my patient. You are not credentialed. You will kill him." One of the agents, the man with the granite jaw, put a heavy hand on Finch's chest, stopping him cold. "Stand down, doctor," the agent said, his voice a low growl. "Let him work." "He's a janitor," Finch wailed, his composure completely shattered. "He cleans toilets." Elias looked up from his work for the first time, his icy blue eyes locking with Finch's. "And in 5 minutes," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I'm going to be the man who saved your patient's life while you were trying to decide which color paddle to use. Now be quiet or get out." The sheer, cold menace in his voice hung in the air. Finch flinched as if struck. The room, which had been a whirlwind of noise, became unnervingly quiet, punctuated only by the dying beeps of the monitor and Elias's sharp commands. "Access," Elias said,
The medic nodded.
expertly palpating for the pulse in the general's left groin, the uninjured side. He slid the large-bore needle in with practiced skill, a flash of dark, venous-looking blood. "I'm in," the medic confirmed. "Wire in," Elias ordered. He took the long, flexible J-wire from the medic and fed it smoothly into the sheath. His movements were fluid, economical, impossibly fast. He wasn't just competent, he was a master. "Give me fluoroscopy." A radiology tech, who had been hovering uselessly in the corner, stared at him. The portable C-arm isn't—" "I don't need a picture," Elias snapped, his eyes never leaving the patient. "I need to know where the tip is. Palpate the xiphoid process." A terrified nurse reached out and pressed on the bottom of the general's sternum. "Feel it?" Elias asked, gently advancing the catheter over the wire. The nurse nodded, her eyes wide. "Good. I'm in Zone 1. Balloon up. 10 cc's of saline." The medic injected the saline into the balloon port. On the monitor, something miraculous happened. The blood pressure, which had been hovering near 0, jumped. 40/20, then 60/30, then 75/40. The chaotic heart rhythm began to organize itself. The bleeding in the general's lower body had been stopped from the inside. Elias had effectively placed an internal tourniquet on the largest blood vessel in the body. The collective gasp in the room was audible. They were witnessing a procedure most had only ever read about, performed in the middle of a chaotic ER bay, by a man in a janitor's uniform, in under 90 seconds. Dr. Finch stared, his mouth hanging open, his face a canvas of disbelief, humiliation, and dawning terror. It wasn't just that the janitor was performing medicine. It was that he was performing it with a level of skill and confidence that Finch, in his wildest dreams, could never hope to possess. The power dynamic in the room hadn't just shifted. It had been utterly and irrevocably inverted. The janitor was in command. The chief of the ER was just a spectator to his own obsolescence. Just as a fragile stability settled over the trauma bay, a new presence made itself felt at the entrance. The phalanx of agents parted for a man who moved with an aura of absolute authority that dwarfed even theirs. He was tall and powerfully built, even in his late 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the wind. He wore the uniform of a 4-star general of the United States Army, his chest a constellation of ribbons telling a story of decades of service and combat. This was not the patient. This was his escort, delayed by the chaos of the ambush. This was General Hammond, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he looked furious. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the blood on the floor, the terrified staff, the pale face of Dr. Finch, and the still critical form of General Thorne on the gurney. His gaze finally settled on the figure at the center of it all, the man in the grey janitor's uniform, calmly calling out orders as he monitored the Reboa catheter. General Hammond's angry stride faltered. He stopped dead, his eyes widening in stunned recognition. The fury on his face melted away, replaced by a wave of shock so profound it seemed to shake his entire frame. The room, already tense, went dead silent. The only sound was the now steady beep of the heart monitor, a testament to the work of the man at its center. The general took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another. The agents watched him, confused by his reaction. He walked right up to the edge of the controlled chaos around the gurney, his eyes never leaving Elias.
His voice, when he finally spoke,
Was not the angry bark of a commander, but a choked, disbelieving whisper. "My God," he breathed, "it can't be." He looked at the agent with the scar over his eye, the first one who had recognized Elias. "Sergeant," the general rasped, Is that who I think it is?" The agent stood ramrod straight. "Yes, General, it's him." General Hammond turned back to Elias, his expression a mixture of awe, relief, and a deep, sorrowful reverence. He ignored Dr. Finch entirely. He ignored everyone. He spoke directly to the man in the janitor's uniform, his voice now clear and ringing with emotion, filling the silent room. "Sergeant Major Vance," he said, the formal address a thunderclap in the sterile space. "Elias, we thought you were dead." Elias finally looked up, his work of stabilizing the patient momentarily complete. He met the general's eyes, and for the first time, a flicker of the old soldier, the man behind the legend, showed through.
a hint of weariness.
Of pain. "The reports were exaggerated, sir," he said, his voice a dry rasp. General Hammond let out a short, choked laugh. "Wraith," he said, using the call sign with a familiarity that sent a fresh wave of shock through the onlookers. "They told us you went down with the bird on Sentinel Ridge. They said you stayed with the wounded. No survivors." "I got lucky, General," Elias said quietly. "Or unlucky, depending on the day." The general's gaze hardened as he finally turned his attention to the trembling, ashen-faced Dr. Finch. "And who?" General Hammond demanded, his voice dropping to a lethally cold temperature. "Are you?" I am Dr. Alistair Finch," he stammered, "chief of this department. I was—" "You were what?" the general interrupted, his voice like cracking ice. "My lead agent's initial report says you were about to release the tourniquet on a man with a transected femoral artery. It says you were trying to use a defibrillator on a man who had no blood left to pump. It says you stood here, frozen, while the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was dying on your table. Is that an accurate report, Doctor?" Finch's face went from pale to ghostly white. He tried to speak, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. General Hammond gestured with a gloved hand toward Elias. "Do you have any idea who this is?" he snarled. "This man you have dressed in a janitor's uniform?" "This is Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance, the most decorated 18 Delta medic in the history of the Special Operations Command. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions on Sentinel Ridge, an action from which it appears he miraculously survived. This janitor has performed surgical procedures in the dark, under fire, with nothing but a knife and his bare hands. He has held the lives of more heroes in his palms than you have read about in books." The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy. A posthumous Medal of Honor winner. a legendary operator, working as a janitor, being berated, humiliated by the man now trembling before them. The nurses and residents stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of the quiet, limping old man with the titan being described. The sycophants who had laughed at Finch's jokes now looked at the floor, their faces burning with shame. Dr. Finch's world had completely disintegrated. The foundation of his identity, his credentials, his title, his wealth, his perceived superiority, had been pulverized in a matter of minutes. He stood there, exposed and pathetic, a charlatan in a white coat. General Hammond was not finished with him. The general's fury was a cold, precise instrument, and he was now dissecting Finch with it, piece by piece, in front of the entire department.
I have 2 dead agents.
And 3 more wounded because of the attack that brought General Thorne here, Hammond said, his voice dangerously low, each word a hammer blow. They died getting him to a place of safety, to a top-tier medical facility where he could be saved. They died getting him to you. He took a step closer to Finch, whose eyes were wide with terror. And you were going to let him die. Your ego, your incompetence, was about to negate their sacrifice. You were about to fail them, fail him, and fail your country. Finch began to babble, a desperate stream of excuses. I didn't know. The situation was complex. I was following protocol. I have an impeccable record. Your record is irrelevant, the general snapped.
He turned his gaze back to Elias,
his expression softening instantly. Sergeant Major, what is General Thorne's status? Elias, who had been monitoring the slow, steady rise of the general's blood pressure, answered without looking up. Stable for now, sir. The Reboa has arrested the hemorrhage. He's received 6 units of whole blood and is responding. But the balloon can't stay up for more than 30 minutes. The clock is ticking. He needs a vascular surgeon and an OR. Yesterday. My team is prepping Air Force One for medical transport to Walter Reed, General Hammond stated. But we can't move him like this. We need to get that artery ligated here. He turned back to Finch, his eyes blazing. You paged your vascular surgeon. Where is he? A young resident, shaking, spoke up. Dr. Morrison is the chief of vascular. He's in surgery, a 12-hour aortic reconstruction. He can't break scrub. Get me another one, Hammond commanded.
The backup is Dr. Chen,
the resident stammered. He's in Aspen, at a conference. A suffocating silence fell over the room. The best hospital in the state, a beacon of medical excellence, had no one. No one available who could perform the delicate, life-saving surgery required. Finch's face was a grotesque mask of horror as the full weight of his institutional failure crashed down upon him. General Hammond stared at Finch with pure, unadulterated contempt. So you have no surgeon, you have no plan. All you have is a title and an expensive watch. He looked around the room, at the stunned faces of the ER staff. You all stood here and let this happen. You watched this man, he pointed to Finch, berate a national hero. You let him run this department into the ground. He pulled out his satellite phone, its military-grade casing looking alien in the sterile hospital environment.
He punched a single number.
This is General Hammond. I need a secure line to the Secretary of Defense. Yes, right now. He paused, listening. Patch him through. He never took his eyes off Finch. Mr. Secretary, Hammond said into the phone, his voice calm but carrying the weight of impending doom. There's been a situation at Prestige Medical Center in... Where are we? He asked the room at large. A nurse whispered the city name. The situation with General Thorne is under control, for now. thanks to the intervention of Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance. He paused again. Yes, sir, that Elias Vance. It's a long story, but the immediate issue is the gross criminal incompetence of the leadership at this facility. The Chief of Emergency Medicine, a Dr. Alistair Finch, nearly killed him. Finch made a sound like a whimpering dog. Yes, sir, Hammond continued. I want his medical license revoked, effective immediately, and I want a full investigation into this hospital's administration, their hiring practices, and their emergency protocols. I am declaring this ER a temporary federal jurisdiction. No one leaves. No records are deleted. Consider this entire department a crime scene. He listened for another moment. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. He clicked the phone off and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at two of his agents. Take Dr. Finch to a secure room. Confiscate his phone and his credentials. He is not to speak to anyone. The two agents moved on Finch, their faces impassive. No, Finch whispered, backing away. You can't do this. I'm a doctor. You're relieved, the lead agent said, grabbing Finch's arm in a grip of steel. Finch tried to pull away, his dignity dissolving into a pathetic, flailing panic. Let go of me. Do you know who I am? My father is on the board of... The agent twisted Finch's arm behind his back, forcing a pained yelp out of him. The second agent took his other arm. They began to march the now sobbing Dr. Finch out of the trauma bay, past the staff who had once feared and revered him. His cries of, "This is a mistake," and "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," echoed down the hall before being cut off by a closing door. The titan of Prestige Medical had been reduced to a whimpering child, dragged away in disgrace. The silence he left behind was absolute. With Finch gone, the oppressive atmosphere of fear lifted, replaced by one of focused, urgent purpose. The ER staff, freed from the paralysis of their former boss's incompetence, now looked to Elias, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe, shame, and a desperate desire to help. The janitor they had ignored was now the undisputed commander of the room. Time? Elias asked, his voice cutting through the silence. The young tactical medic glanced at his watch. Balloon has been up for 14 minutes. Okay, Elias said, his mind working with battlefield speed. We don't have a vascular surgeon, so we become one. I need a full laparotomy tray, a DeBakey clamp, vascular clips, and 4-0 proline suture. And I need the best scrub nurse in this hospital. A woman in her 50s, her face etched with experience, stepped forward without hesitation. Her name tag read, Martha R.N. That would be me, sir, she said, her voice steady. I've been a surgical nurse for 30 years. Good, Martha, Elias said, giving her a quick, appreciative nod. You're with me. Everyone else, he said, his voice rising to address the entire room. Your job is to support us. I need blood on standby, 6 more units of O-neg and a cooler of FFP. I need anesthesia to manage his vitals. He's too unstable for general. We'll use ketamine to keep him dissociated. Let's move. We're turning this bay into an operating room. A flurry of efficient activity erupted. Carts were rolled in, sterile drapes were procured, and the space around the gurney was transformed. Martha worked at Elias's side, her movements a perfect, silent ballet of anticipation. She knew what he needed before he asked, laying out instruments with a precision that matched his own. The rest of the staff, who minutes ago were frozen in fear, now moved with a competence they had been forced to suppress under Finch's reign. They were good at their jobs, and Elias was letting them prove it. General Hammond stood back, observing, a silent, powerful guardian ensuring no one interfered. He watched Elias pull on a pair of sterile gloves, his scarred, calloused hands moving with the grace of a concert pianist. This was not a janitor playing doctor. This was a master craftsman returning to his art. "Scalpel," Elias said. Martha placed it in his hand. With a long, steady incision, Elias opened the general's abdomen, from the xiphoid process down to the navel. The room was silent, save for the beep of the monitor and the quiet slosh of the suction tube. He worked quickly, dissecting through layers of muscle and fascia, his knowledge of anatomy absolute. "Retractors," he commanded.
2 residents,
Their faces pale but determined, stepped in to hold the incision open, exposing the abdominal cavity. Elias's hands dove inside, his fingers palpating with incredible sensitivity. "There," he murmured. "Aorta is here." His fingers traced the path of the great vessel downwards. "I need to get proximal control before I can release the balloon." He worked for several minutes in intense, focused silence. He was no longer in a hospital. He was back in the dust, the noise, the pressure. He was in his element. He located the iliac bifurcation, the point where the aorta splits to feed the legs. With delicate, precise movements, he isolated the damaged common femoral artery just below the split. The tissue was a mangled mess, shredded by bone fragments from the shattered pelvis.
suction.
He ordered, clearing the pooling blood. "There's the tear. It's a full transection." He looked at the clock. 22 minutes. He took a deep breath. "Okay, Martha, DeBakey clamp." She slapped the long, elegant vascular clamp into his palm. "Releasing the balloon in 3, 2, 1. Release." The tactical medic drew the saline out of the Reboa catheter. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, a torrent of dark blood welled up from the depths of the wound. "Now," Elias said, his voice calm. Before the gush could become a fatal hemorrhage, he slipped the clamp onto the artery above the tear, his movements sure and swift. The bleeding stopped instantly. He had bought them time. "Okay," he breathed, a droplet of sweat tracing a path down his temple. "He's clamped. Blood pressure?" "Holding at 90/50, the anesthesiologist reported, his voice filled with disbelief. Elias nodded. The immediate crisis was over. Now came the painstaking work of repair. For the next hour, he worked with unwavering focus, trimming the shredded ends of the artery, placing tiny, perfect stitches with the 4-0 proline suture, rejoining the vessel that carried life to the limb. He was rebuilding a man from the inside out. The staff watched, mesmerized. They were witnessing a level of surgical skill that was nothing short of miraculous. The quiet janitor had become a giant before their eyes. Sarah, the young nurse who had always shown Elias a small kindness, fetching him coffee or asking about his day, watched from the corner, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying from fear, but from awe and a profound sense of shame for how she and everyone else had so utterly misjudged the quiet man with the limp. When he was finally done, Elias released the clamp. The artery, once severed, now pulsed with a healthy, rhythmic beat. Color began to return to the general's leg. Elias stepped back from the table, pulling off his bloody gloves. "He's stable," he announced, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Close him up and get him to the ICU. He's not out of the woods, but he'll live." He leaned against a counter, the adrenaline finally leaving him. The full weight of the last few hours, the last 2 years, crashed down on him. He had saved a life. He had revealed himself. The ghost was a ghost no more. General Hammond walked over and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Sergeant Major," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it." Elias just nodded, his eyes closing. He was too tired to speak. The hero had returned, not with a bang, but with the quiet, steady hands of a surgeon. Weeks later, the world had changed. The story of the janitor hero of Prestige Medical had become a national sensation, a modern-day fable of humility and valor. News reports had meticulously detailed the downfall of Dr. Alistair Finch. Stripped of his medical license and facing a litany of lawsuits and a federal investigation, his career was not just over, it was annihilated. His name became a byword for arrogance and incompetence. The hospital's board was summarily dismissed, and Prestige Medical Center was now under new management, struggling to rebuild its shattered reputation. Elias Vance was no longer the ghost. He was, once again, Command Sergeant Major Vance, though he insisted everyone just call him Elias. He had been debriefed by a dozen different agencies, his survival a matter of intense interest. The story was simple. He'd been thrown clear of the helicopter crash on Sentinel Ridge, badly injured, and found by a local goat herder who had nursed him back to health over many months. Suffering from amnesia and post-traumatic stress, he had wandered for years, eventually making his way back to the States with a hazy, broken memory of his past life. The quiet, menial work of a janitor had been a refuge, a way to exist without having to remember. The crisis in the ER had been a violent, unwelcome key, unlocking the skills and memories he had buried so deep. His posthumous Medal of Honor was officially reinstated, to be awarded to him in person this time by the President. He sat now in a well-appointed office overlooking the sprawling campus of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The offer had come directly from General Hammond. He wasn't a patient here. He was the new senior advisor for the Combat Trauma Training Program. His job was to teach the next generation of 18 Deltas, to pass on the knowledge he had learned in blood and fire. A knock came at his door. "Come in," Elias said, his voice stronger now, the rasp almost gone. General Thorne, now walking with the aid of a cane, but otherwise fully recovered, entered the office. He smiled, a warm, genuine expression. "Settling in, Sergeant Major?" "Still getting used to the view, sir," Elias replied, a rare, small smile touching his own lips. "It's better than the back of a supply closet." "I came to thank you again, Elias," Thorne said, his voice serious. "Not just for saving my life, but for reminding a lot of people what a real hero looks like. It's not about the title or the uniform, it's about what you do when the chips are down." "Just did my job, sir," Elias said, the old, ingrained response. "You did more than that," Thorne insisted. He placed a small, velvet-covered box on Elias's desk. "This is from the team. The agents you worked with that day." Elias opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a single, custom-made challenge coin. On one side was the insignia of the Secret Service. On the other, the Special Forces crest, and engraved around the edge were the words, "In Wraith, we trust." Below that was the date of the incident at Prestige Medical. Elias picked it up, the heavy metal cool in his hand. He ran his thumb over the engraving, a wave of emotion washing over him. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a promotion. It was a token of respect from his brothers in arms, a recognition that he was, and always would be, one of them. After the general left, Elias sat in the quiet of his new office for a long time. He looked out the window at the young soldiers walking the grounds below. His new students. his new purpose. On his desk, next to the challenge coin, was a file containing the curriculum he was developing. It included a module on a procedure few had ever mastered: resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. He thought of Dr. Finch, a man now lost to disgrace. He thought of the nurses and doctors at Prestige, their careers now dedicated to a new, humbler standard of care. He thought of the quiet dignity of service and the loud arrogance of status. The world was full of people who judged by the cover, by the uniform, by the title on a door. They look, but they do not see. They dismiss the quiet, the humble, the unassuming, never knowing the fire that might be banked within. Elias stood up and walked over to a closet. He opened it. Hanging inside was a single, freshly laundered, grey janitor's uniform. It had been sent to him from the hospital, a strange, final piece of his old life. He looked at it for a long moment, the symbol of his anonymity, his penance, his invisibility. Then he closed the door, leaving the ghost behind for good. He was Elias Vance, and he had work to do. And perhaps, for the first time in a very long time, he was home. We pass by ghosts like him every day: the quiet man bagging groceries, the old woman sweeping a porch, the silent figure mopping a floor. We should remember to look closer. We never know when we might be in the presence of greatness.